Welcome back, everyone, to R2KAST number 17. Today we've got a really interesting guest in Martin Kennedy. If you want to say hello there, Martin.
Hello, Wallace. How are you getting on?
Very well, very well. Good to have you on. And as you've seen there, when Martin said hello, his background's much more interesting than mine. We'll get into that. It is actually his farm in the background. But before we get into that, just quickly for new listeners or old listeners, whatever you're listening on, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that sort of thing, make sure to give it a review. Maybe say what you're liking, say what you're not liking, apart from me on the face cam. And if there's any other guests you might like to have, I'm really covering everything with folk in field sports, with folk in farming, with folk in policy. I'm trying to get someone in fishing at the minute. Anyone in sort of rural food production or rural production of any sort, give us a shout about it. And the best way to get in touch is over on the Facebook and Instagram pages, R2KAST. So give us a follow there and you see what's happening. But enough all that nonsense. We'll get into sort of fun stuff that we're here for. Martin, could you tell us a bit about yourself, maybe a bit about history? Are you from a farm? Maybe some sort of stuff like that.
Yeah, no bother. Born and brought up in this area. Actually born in the state here, born in Aberfeldy. We're up in Highland Perthshire. We're just about 3 miles from Aberfeldy here, actually. And my father came to the estate that we're on just now back in November 1946. And he had his first challenge was the winter of 47 that everybody talks about, and you know which must have been pretty horrendous. There's no doubt about that. And then probably his second challenge was having his two sons coming along. So there's myself, my older brother. My older brother's Drew. He's 9 years older than myself, and then so it would be 56. My brother was born, and I was 65 when I was in 1965 when I was born, and Dad's died sadly back in 2007. But my brother's still on the farm at home, so we got the chance to come here in 1996 to take the rest of the estate on, because now it was a small hill farm, and it wasn't really enough for my father and two young lads as well. There wasn't enough land on it, tenanted hill farm. And so I went to college, which had a whale of a time, to be quite honest, like everybody else. It was absolutely brilliant. 3 years block release, then a year's full-time farm management, which was really good and really interesting at Elmwood. And it was really good at that time because Elmwood had everything. They had the new piggery, as it was then, it was built. They had a modern dairy, they had everything, the arable side, the whole lot. It was really good. But like everybody else at college, I spent too much money. So when I left college, I took a harvest job. And I thought I was applying for a harvest job in Fife, but it turned out they said, would you be quite happy to go to Strichen? And I'm thinking, yeah, well, that must be maybe near Glenrothes or something. I had no idea when I was that age. It turned out it was up just 9 miles from Fraserburgh. So went up to Fraser. It was 2 harvests I was up there, which was brilliant, on like a house on fire. So it was quite a change for me, to be honest. It was going from a Massey Ferguson 35X with a double furrow plough, conventional, 794, going up to a 4-furrow reversible with a 100 horsepower tractor was a huge change. So, but absolutely great. Got on brilliant, the manager up there, and it was really good. So I went up the second year as well. Then I got a chance to work in a farm just outside Aberfeldy with 140 cows and 700 ewes, and I was there for 7 years till it got sold, and then we got made redundant because the place was bought over by folk who were going to farm it in hand. And then I got a chance I was quite heavily involved in young farmers at the time. Young farmers have played a big part of my life, and which was fantastic. And I didn't really want to leave the area. Got the offer of 1 or 2 jobs out and about, but I didn't want to leave the area. So I got a chance to go in a digger with a local digger contractor. So I was there for 2 years, and I learned a huge amount sitting in a digger, believe it or not, which has been great for when I'm at home here now, because the amount of stuff I've done here now with my own old digger, it's great. And then we got the chance, the estate actually here where my father and my brother was, things maybe weren't going the way they were liking it, and they were when it was farmed in hand, and we got the opportunity to take the rest of the estate on. And so Dad had said, well, I'll need to see my youngest son, see if he wants to come home. So we got that chance, and that was back in 1996, and we've been here ever since. So we took on the hill and the sheep at the valuation in 96, which was quite high at the time. Although relatively speaking, it's probably not that bad now. So yeah, so it was all blackface ewes and mule ewes at that time, and no cows, and we now have 600 ewes and 60 cows, and they're split between continental ewes in the low ground, then Cheviot and Blackies in the hill, and then we've got continental cows in the low ground, and we've got Highland cows in the hill now as well. So it's so that's where the sort of kicked off here, born and bred here, and still here now, and I'm here with my wife and 3 daughters. My oldest daughter works with Scottish Woodlands. My middle daughter's at home full time, and my youngest daughter's at home part time. So yeah, it's good.
Excellent. Are the 2 younger daughters at university or something? Or are
they both did went to Oakridge to do an HND. My oldest daughter Gillian, she did an honours degree in environmental geography at Stirling University. But Katrina, that's Gillian, and Katrina and Yvonne both went to Oakridge. So, but they're both completed now and home. So yeah, good.
Could you just quickly tell us a wee bit there, Martin? You've told us about the farm and stuff, but you were just saying to me before we kicked off sort of what the background is and stuff.
The background there is behind me. Just you can see sort of behind me. We've got 2 polytunnels. We built, everything was lambed outside. We don't have an awful lot of sheds here. In 2009, we built a polytunnel just for lambing in, just to try and get some of the weather. As I say, we're 800 feet here. We've got 2,500 feet, so we're quite exposed. But the backdrop behind me is a shooting estate, and the shooting side often gets a lot of criticism, but which is really unfair because that's brought a lot of biodiversity to the area as well, brings a lot of employment, and it's we've got a lot of oyster catchers, peewits, curlews, they're which is great, but that's a lot of predators are under control because it's a keeper estate. Foxes are under control, and the difference that makes is amazing. So it's, but no, we've got a good backdrop. We think we're doing quite a lot for the environment here. We've got that backdrop that's behind me would not be like that if it wasn't for agriculture. And I think people tend to forget that. And that we have got a fantastic environment in Scotland, something to be proud of. And if we didn't have in this part of the world, if it wasn't for livestock farming, you'd probably be looking at scrub pastures and nothing for the tourists to look at anyway. Yeah.
And to look at it from talking about biodiversity, just at a glance, you're not seeing any monoculture. There's no fields the same colour. There's trees. There's everything. I don't know how you can look at that and think it's bad for the environment. But
it's funny. It's interesting, Wallace, because you go right to the top of the hill at the backdrop there. There is quite a bit of that is monoculture because it's trees. There's a 500-acre block up there, and then straight across on the other side of the valley from here, it goes from Aberfeldy basically down to Dunkeld, and it's solid forestry that was planted back in the 80s. Now, if you go into the forestry, that's desertification. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just you go in there and it's dark, it's barren. Any wildlife that was in that area before comes out onto the farmland to feed and whatever. So the only monoculture we have is too many trees in one block. That's what we'll have in this part of the world. But there's not an issue with trees. We've never had an issue with trees. It's if they're in the right place, you're getting shade, you're creating wildlife corridors, all these kind of things. You're getting shelter as well sometimes, which makes a big difference. But just big blocks is not a great thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's just a thick, big block, there's not going to be any fauna because the canopy's too thick. So exactly. I think there's so many merits of trees, but I think like everything, it's got to be done in regulation, and or maybe it's maybe a different. Well, I plan to go down that route in a minute with you talking to you a bit about that. But it's interesting you mentioned 47. Just before Martin and I sort of hit record there, we're having a chat a bit about on Arran. There was a snow in 2013. And my late grand now, was sitting in the kitchen in 2013 saying, this is nothing like it was in 47. And the thing is, even if it was worse in 2013, there would have been no machinery to help them dig through snow and stuff. It must have been dreadful. You can't think what it would be. What was the other things? Yeah, you mentioned young farmers has played a pretty big part of your life, Martin. Could you maybe tell us a bit about that and maybe where young farmers is taking you?
I think, to be honest, if it wasn't for young farmers, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing just now with NFU Scotland. I'm absolutely certain about that. I mean, it was a great, it kind of brought you out of your shell. I was always, I'm pretty shy, to be honest. I probably still am, realistically. Maybe folk don't think that, but I am. And it brought... it kind of brings you out your shell a bit. I mean, I got involved in Young Farmers when I was about, I wouldn't have been 14. I would probably been 16, 17 before I started going along. And it was just great fun. You know, that's what it was. I mean, that's what it was all about. It was good fun, but educational as well. You know, you're going to, you know, as again, a lot of folk are very keen of stock judgings, valuations. And probably the most daunting thing ever was speech making competitions. And I can remember the first, you know, junior competition I was in, and you were quaking in your boots, to be honest. Just standing up there doing I don't know, the first one usually, maybe if it was a junior speech making team, you maybe have a chairman, a speaker, and a vote of thanks or something. And you usually get started off with doing a vote of thanks scene, and even it's only maybe 2 minutes at the end or something, and you're sitting there, and of course you're last, and you're just shaking, but it just gets you over that sort of hurdle about speaking to people and speaking to people in the right manner when it comes to, you know, by holding meetings, and it really shows when it comes to holding meetings now, and you go to some events where meetings are held, and you think, you've been a speech making team, or you've been you see that how people can hold a meeting and conduct a meeting, and I think that's really important. And it just you know, speech making was always a great thing, and it just gave you an opportunity to be able to speak in public. And I've no doubt, I mean, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And it's, you know, it was just great fun. You know, you meet, I mean, and of course you went through all the sort of ranks in Young Farmers as well. Was chairman of the club for 2 years, and then went on to county, and I was East Area chairman. In fact, when it was Perthshire County, well, it's district, but it was Perthshire County, we always called it at that time. And my wife's actually Fife and Kinross district chairman, so she was from Auchtermuchty and Fife, so that's how we met. So it's I think that happens so often, you know, in this kind of industry, you meet your wife through Young Farmers. That quite often happens. So it's but Young Farmers have been brilliant, and we still support them. I still think I'm a Young Farmer. We still go to the, unfortunately we can't have them now, but when it comes to the dances and Christmas ball, burn supper, you know, all these kind of things, you know, if there's any event going, there's a lot of sort of older vice presidents and that such like, we'll still go along and support them, because it's been brilliant, you know.
No, it's a great thing. I mean, I never fully got involved. There's still time to do so, but we started that in Young Farmers in 2015, and maybe the core group of like 12, and it ran for 4 years. And I wouldn't say we did loads, but you met folk, and I was maybe one of the more confident in the group, and sort of brought the ones that were maybe not quite as, and you gained so much from that, you know. And it's a brilliant thing. And like you say, Arran Young Farmers started in 2015, but Arran Agricultural, whatever it was called, youth, I can't remember exactly, but ended in 1993. And just about every committee member was married to one of the other ones. You know, I mean, it's a small pool in Arran, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it does. It's like-minded, isn't it? But we'll get, you mentioned your role in the NFU there, Mark. Could you tell us a bit about your role? You've also sort of went through the ranks there, as you say. Maybe how you got involved in that. You mentioned Young Farmers was maybe part of the inspiration, but you know.
Yeah, there was, and to be honest, it was probably Young Farmers that kicked it off. It would be because we always had, like, from our Young Farmers Club, we always had 2 delegates. We'd go along to a branch meeting. You never said it, and you sat at the back and just kind of listened. But it was always quite interesting, and just seeing what was going on. And it was always apparent that, you know, in terms of, and I think this is where the union's got a big problem, because the union's got, it's not a problem, it's just a challenge. You've got every sector to look at. So if you've got a single organisation, whether it's looking after maybe, you know, cereals, beef, sheep, pigs, whatever it is, they're concentrated on the one thing. You know, that's but where NFU Scotland's got to take into account is it's every part of the industry, because we're so interdependent between everything. And it became apparent to me at that time, even just going along as a delegate from Young Farmers, I thought, yeah, there's quite a challenge here for NFU Scotland to try and get the bigger picture and look at, because quite often decisions that are made have conflicts between sectors, and that's a challenge. And and then probably it was when we came here in our own right in '96 that we, of course, Dad was always a member of NFU Scotland, had never not been a member, and I thought, well, we'll need to do that in our own right as well. So we became a member straight away in 1996, and just started going along to the local meetings, Highland Perthshire branch meetings, and then it was probably just you know, people just persuading me to maybe take on a role. I think the first role I had was LFA monitor So less favoured area monitor. So I went on that, and I was just sort of reporting back to the branch. And then, I got a wee bit further up the tree, and then people wanted me to sort of, represent them in the LFA committee. And then in 2009, I was on the national committee for less favoured areas. And then people just started, pushing me again. They just sort of kept on going. I was chairman, vice chairman of the LFA committee, then chairman of the LFA committee. And then I got my arm twisted to stand for vice president in 2017. Which I did, and I got in, and the rest history, as they say. So I was vice president for 4 years, and now I'm president. And it's just, it's really interesting. It's hugely challenging, hugely time consuming. But you stick your head above the parapet, and I'd rather be. The opportunity came, and it's always difficult because you think, well, is the timing right? And you think, well, maybe the time is not right. Maybe I could have given the girls more of a hand at home, until they got into the swing of things. But then when is the timing right? The opportunity was there, I took it. And then if I didn't take it at that point, well, it might not have come along. And then you're thinking, well, I should have had a go at something. So I'll never regret having a go. And I think it's always a struggle. You get criticism quite often as well. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, but then I'd rather be criticised for trying than criticised for just sitting at home moaning about it. So, because that doesn't get anybody anywhere. So it's
absolutely.
I think I think we've got such a story to tell, such a fantastic industry. And I think we've got to really drive that forward. And that was the two things when it really got down the nitty gritty about definitely standing for president, which I always thought once I was standing for VP, I wasn't going to stand for a VP unless I thought, no, I'm going to keep going if I can. And the two things was trying to get a policy right that fits Scotland, and trying to maybe try and educate, the general public a bit better, and try and deflect some of this myths that comes against agriculture all the time, because it's not the case. We're tarred with the same stick that's likes of California, Brazil, the States, all it's Australian trade deals, all these things that are a concern right now. And but we're not like that in Scotland. We're doing it really well here. Yeah, we can do more. There's no doubt about that. But in comparison to other parts of the world, we're in a great position.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. With the NFU, for maybe some listeners aren't aware of it, Martin, what is the NFU? What is their role in the industry?
Yeah, well, NFU Scotland is a lobbying organisation. That's primarily, that's the sole thing, is to lobby, governments, whether it's Scottish government, whether it's UK government, whether it's still Europe, or in the global picture, because we still have a voice in there. So we're lobbying to make sure we can get a good future for Scottish agriculture. And we've quite a wide setup. We've about 8,500, 9,000 members, and we'll have a sort of structure in place where we'll have 9 regions across the country, from Shetland all the way down to Wigtonshire and Stranraer, and Argyll and the Islands in the west, East Central, right across the board. And it covers about 73 branches. So there's a fair network, and then each region has a regional manager, and then we have a group secretary network through the mutual as well, through NFU Mutual. So it's a very well structured organisation. We'll have a president, 2 vice presidents, chief executive, and then we'll have a board structure beneath that, where we'll have our regional chairs and our commodity chairs as well, covering sort of on the board. Quite a big board, actually. The board's about 24, 25. It's quite a big board. 26 actually, there's a counting everybody. It's quite a big board, but it's good. It works well.
I guess you need a big board and something like that, because as you say, there's so many different facets all coming in together. It's not just sheep farming or agroforestry. It's everything. It's quite a sophisticated outfit. It's a lot more than I actually realised. Do you have any idea how many employees there is from NFU?
We've got nearly 40 employees in total.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Full time.
That's impressive. Very good. And just one question on the presidency there, Martin. Is it a strict 4-year term and then
No, the way it works is when you're standing for vice president, and it changed a number of years ago now, right enough. But if you're standing for vice president, you get your first 2 years. You can be a vice president for as long as you want. If you keep standing for VP, that you can do that. There's no limit to that. But your first 2 years is sort of protected, so nobody can put you out. You've got 2 years in. It gives you that 2 years to sort of get understanding how things work. Then you're on an annual election after that, so you'll be up. You have to stand, go for a hustings or whatever it is every year after that. President is slightly different. It's a minimum of 2 years, but a maximum of 4, but it's only 2-year terms you can do. So if that's me, I've been in the role now for, well, I suppose that's maybe 6 months now. And so in 18 months' time, I can't be challenged in March, next February next year. But the following February, I can't be either, because if I get in the following February, if I stand again for the next 2 years, that's it. So it's 2-year terms as a maximum. So a president can only do a maximum of 4 years. And I think that's right, because it gives that opportunity for changing ideas, developing ideas, creates that churn, brings a freshness to the sort of leadership team, and that, hopefully comes onto the board as well. And I think it is important, because you don't want an organisation that's going to be stale. You want a change. You want a change in the organisation to keep it fresh all the time.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's a strange comparison to make, but when you see political leaders leading for more than 4 years, or more than sort of whatever the term states, like 25 years stuff, there's always problems. But yeah, you mentioned the Australian trade deal just in chatting there, Martin. What do you think it means for us as an industry?
We were really worried about this, because, and it's kind of related to Brexit in a way, because we've never made trade deals before. We've not. Well, no, that's not true. We haven't made trade deals for probably nearly 50 years, because that's been done by Europe, because we've been part of Europe until last year. So and the thing is, we're the new kids in the block when it comes to this. And of course, the UK government are wanting to be able to say, well, Brexit's not a problem at all. We can show that we can actually make our own trade deals. But however, Europe's looking at that in a slightly different. They're wanting to make things as difficult as possible for us as we leave, because they're saying, and that is causing us some real difficulties at the minute still. But the reality is, when it comes to making the trade deals from our own perspective, the UK government haven't done this for almost 50 years, and we're really concerned about this, particularly the Australian trade deal, because the Australians have been making deals all the time. They know what they're on, they know what they're doing, and they'll be fighting for as big a share of our market as possible. It comes to things like beef, for example. Australia's got a population that's way less than half of the population within the UK. It's more than 30 times the size of the UK. More than 60% of the land is devoted to beef production. So they're a massive agricultural exporting nation. So they'll be seeing the UK as a target, and they're looking for this true liberalisation or free trade and they're looking at down after 15 years' time, they're wanting to have access to about 175,000 tonnes of beef. Now, our total imports, because we're not self-sufficient in beef, is about 360,000 tonnes, and most of that comes from Ireland, and landscapes is similar to what ourselves is. But so, and the danger we have here is this is setting a precedent for any other country that wants to make a deal with us. So it's a cumulative effect. So as New Zealand want to have the same access, I'm pretty sure they will. When it comes to the States, when it comes to any country you want to say that's going to have a free trade deal with us, they will want the same access. Canada will want the same access, I'm sure. And then the implications are completely different, because if the States want the same access as Australia's got, you look at the pig sector, for example, they're still using food waste to feed pigs. We can't do that here. So the cost of production is so much less. If they want the same access in here, what would that do to our pig sector? So it's this cumulative effect, and trying to get, and as a lobbying organisation, and we did get a serious amount of press on this. In fact, in terms of sort of from between the 4 UK unions, I think we had maybe some of the highest contact from the press, national television. I was in Australia radio a couple of times, just on the subject, because they were wondering why we were concerned. We explained it, and then they could see what our point of view was. But of course, the UK government are not wanting to see food inflation. They want to see, it's all about votes, sadly, but they've got to be very careful. And it's really worrying from a Scottish perspective, because we've got some really high standards here, fantastically high standards. And this could completely, it could completely wipe the flow with the trade in our internal market, because if it's not about, it's the volumes that's coming in. So if that volume just completely undermines our market, then we struggle to then, get that, that premium price that we're commanding with beef at the minute.
It is a worrying future. You almost worry that hopefully in a post-Brexit world that the UK government isn't going to reduce our welfare standards to compete, because if that happens, then what's all this work we've done for it, and you'll find a lot of farmers that aren't going to be happy with that. But the standards thing's such an issue. It just, I don't know what the answer is. How can we have these rules that I think are very much merited for welfare and environmental regulations, and then just import stuff that completely abolishes those rules? I mean, when you're saying economies of scale there as well, I was actually looking up on this just for another reason yesterday. The average small farm in Australia, a small beef farm, has 412 head. And that's small, you can't compete with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's over, I think there's 60% of the beef produced in Australia is produced in beef lots in excess of 10,000 animals. Now that's just, it's huge. I mean, you look at, my oldest daughter was out in California, and about 2 years past November, they were in the Harris with the Agri Affairs Committee, again, 3 young farmers. And they were in the Harris Ranch, and when they were there was 115,000 cattle in that one feedlot. There was 115,000 cattle in it, and they've got no water in California. This is the thing. We can do it sustainable here because, they're depleting their water reserves because they're fed from, it's wells and underground sources of water they have, and it's a real struggle. And yet, we can do it naturally here when it's, on grass that we have. We can't eat, we can't grow cereals here, we can't. On our type of ground, we're ideally placed for livestock. So we're using that from a sort of a carbon element as well. Climate change, we're keeping our landscape green because we're managing to graze it. So that's helping sequester carbon. So, and I mean, it's not just about livestock, because we've got to remember the cereal sector is massive in Scotland as well. And of course, if the standards are growing conditions, are growing standards that what we use and how we look after soil health is paramount. And to be fair, the arable sector's led that way when it comes to soil health in the past. And, we don't want to be undermined by, grain products that's going to come in and undermine our market for malt and barley as well, because it's a huge part of the economy is barley. Fish, salmon and whiskey is a huge part of the economy in Scotland. And if we have these things undermined, it's our cereal sector, we're only have about, and again, fruit and veg, it's all the same, very, very high value. There's only about 8 or 9% of our land is what they deem prime agricultural land, and it needs to produce that high quality product. And in terms of output, economically, it's massive. It punches way above its weight.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say about water there. Well, I mean, water security is not even something we consider in Scotland because, well, I think you know why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's so many different prongs to it. It's not just single bits, and all interesting though. Hopefully, I'm sure it'll have its hurdles, but hopefully after a few years we'll sort of even out and find some kind of even playing field anyway. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you mentioned Brexit. How can you not? I'm not a political person. Anyone that listens to me quite often knows I know nothing about politics. But on Brexit, I mean, some of the main issues coming with Brexit, and obviously sort of COVID has further impacted this. But Brexit, you would think, is sort of the first pillar, given it's permanent and COVID should disappear, I hope. As we're not seeing sort of pickers, fruit pickers, we're not seeing shearers coming from New Zealand and stuff like that. What sort of future do you think we have there?
Yeah, there's a lot of impacts from Brexit, and we're still facing a number of these impacts. And one of the big ones is seed potatoes still, because we still can't export our seed potatoes across to Europe. We have a big market across there, and that market's still looking for our seed potatoes. And the problem is again, and it's all politics. This is the real problem, and this is why there's a challenge, because Europe are making the case that it's not going to be easy leaving Europe. You're going to have it challenging, and of course the UK government are saying, well, no, this isn't a problem for us at all. One of the biggest concerns we have on seed potatoes, again, with live exports for animals going across to Northern Ireland, massive issues there, especially from the black-faced breeders' point of view, because we've got ewe lambs that have been traditionally bought and going across to Northern Ireland, have done for a long time now, and that's still causing problems because of the regulations that they can't go across just now, and that's going to continue to cause grief until we get recognition in Europe, come to the table and understand what the challenges are, because they're not feeling the implications just now. And this is where we're pressuring the UK government as much as anybody, and the Scottish government are actually behind us on this one. What's happening with the seed potato is is because we didn't agree to dynamic alignment when we left Europe. They're not agreeing to the equivalence of standards when it comes to sanitary, phytosanitary standards that we have, which is all nonsense. And I can understand to a certain degree why the UK wouldn't agree to dynamic alignment, because if they did that, then what was the point of Brexit? Because agreeing to dynamic alignment means if there's a regulation change in Europe, we've got to agree to that regulation change as well. So that means that, what was the point in having it? So we actually had I'm now, as president, I'm in the COPA meetings, which is COPA COGECA, is the sort of European farming unions and farming cooperatives. So COPA being the unions, COGECA being the cooperatives. And I attend these meetings on a monthly or meeting when they happen. And the last one, not the last one, but the one before, and we were speaking to the Commission, and they, without any qualms, said, well, no, you've decided to leave, you're going to face the consequences. And it was just almost like a door being shut in our face. And we're feeling almost, it's very challenging, because particularly in the seed potato element, and now we've got a challenge with the UK government, because they're now talking about bilateral agreements whereby if some of the seed potatoes in Europe meet the standards that we want them, meet the standards that we think they should be, then the UK government could import on a bilateral basis. And we think this is totally wrong, totally immoral, because it still doesn't allow us to export our potatoes back out to Europe. So we can't have it one way. So not only do I have the sort of asymmetrical trade, but we've got asymmetrical friction as well when it comes to trying to get checks and such like, and border checks that's happening at the minute with our products getting exported. But we don't, it seems to be a one-way traffic, and that can't happen. And if we're not careful, and especially from a Scottish perspective, because agriculture is such a big part of the Scottish economy, it's massive, relevant to what is happening in the UK. Now, I fully understand that some of the growers down south are looking for some of that seed to come in because it's for a different product. Some of the seed potatoes are bringing in can't grow at the minute in Scotland. But well, if there's no alternative, well, that will hopefully bring the pressure up to get this, recognition, and bring the Europe to the table and say, and it's not till they start seeing friction and us saying, no, it can't come in, then they'll start putting pressure on Europe to say, well, okay, there is equivalence here. Let's continue with that trade from Europe and the UK. That's what we want. It's either has to be trade going both ways or no trade going in any direction. It can't be one-way traffic, or it completely undermines what's a big monetary, high value crop, sector in Scotland. So I'm concerned about that.
Well, I mean, the sheer meaning of the word trade is to trade. It's
absolutely
not just that.
Yeah. Again, that's relevant to the beef as well, because we keep getting told about fantastic opportunities for us to sell our high value beef into Australia, but then nobody says that Australia still won't allow beef to go into Australia because of the BSE situation that was still there, which is totally gone. But they're using that as an angle to say, yeah, well, when it comes to that, we'll take it in, but not yet. We're still not accepting it. So I can't see a hugely low population in comparison to us in Australia looking for a massive export opportunity to export beef here, saying, oh, let's have some of that high value beef from Scotland coming into Australia. It's just like David and Goliath in comparison. Scale is huge. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brexit obviously brings a pretty, we're talking about trade, we're talking about struggling to get workers, but on the ground of things, the first thing as farmers we all thought about was subsidy. What does it mean for subsidy? What do you think the future is there?
Well, there's going to be concerns. There's going to be, when you look at how future policy is going to be developed, you look at what's happening south of the border and the environmental land management scheme, we're really concerned about that, seriously concerned, again, from a livestock perspective, but not only livestock, because it's about the whole sort of support structure that we have in agriculture. Okay, cereals prices aren't too bad at the minute, but as soon as you get down to, malt and barley, if, you can't really produce it unless you're getting a minimum of £140 is going to be what's required, and that's just cost of production. That's just breaking even. That's provided you get a good harvest. So unless it's a reasonable price, that support's still absolutely needed in the cereal sector as well. But again, from a livestock perspective, looking at the elms and what they're looking at further south, that's really scary. And we've been trying to fill that policy void that's coming from Scottish government to say, no, we still need that basic level of support going forward. And to come back, this is relevant to Brexit, because we've now got an opportunity to develop a policy that's fit for Scotland, not under the sort of one size fits all under a European sort of umbrella. So what we want to do is try and make sure that we can support the right sectors in the right way, albeit there's going to be some form of conditionality on it. We're going to have to do more for climate change. We're going to have to do more for biodiversity. We know that, but we can't look at them all in silos. We can't look at, say, this is about developing an agricultural policy that can deliver for climate change objectives and biodiversity objectives, not having a climate change policy that will do something for agriculture, because agriculture is absolutely key to the targets we have in front of us for net zero by 2045, 75% reductions by 2030. So we'll have a lot of challenges in front, but agriculture is in pole position to deliver that.
And would that support come in the form of a sort of similar subsidy-based thing, or more looking at the sort of buying side, increased prices, which is obviously tricky with the consumer?
Well, I think the support needs to come, and this is where the big debate is right now. Actually, as we speak, there's debate on how this policy is going to be developed. We've had farmer-led groups that were kicked off back in 2019. The first one it was co-chaired by Jim Walker and the Circular Beef Climate Group. Then there was another Fergus Ewan, Cabinet Secretary at the time, then kicked off the other 4 farmer-led groups, which was the Dairy, Arable, Big Sector Group, and the Hill and Upland and Crofting Group, which all reported by the 24th of March this year. But the interesting thing was all sectors were on the same page, and this is a sort of an opportunity for Scottish Government to have the industry leading when it comes to how we can meet these challenges. And these groups all reported with very similar views on biodiversity, climate change targets, but at the core of it all was still food production. Because I think what we've always got to remember is if we don't produce enough food here, then we're going to import it from other parts of the world that don't have the same concerns as we do, and all that's doing is offshoring our emissions to other parts, and then we've then lost our employment, we've then lost our infrastructure, and that's why the support element and the critical mass is so important in Scotland. Because if we don't have that certain degree of critical mass, then you don't keep the infrastructure in place, which is markets, abattoirs, maltsters, processors, the whole lot. So we need that activity element to be part of it, albeit there's going to be conditionality on it.
And just kind of moving away from it, we're talking about everything. COP's coming to Glasgow in November. Do you think that does anything for Scottish, or just Scotland in general, really, but looking at agriculture?
Yeah, I think it gives us a platform. We've got quite a lot of irons in the fire with COP26. We're still waiting to see if we can get access to the green and blue zone, which we're hoping we will get into. I know a lot of other organisations have been told no, that's not possible. But outside of that, we still have a lot of plans. When it comes to promoting what Scottish agriculture brings, both economically and from a climate change and biodiversity perspective, and where we are in relative terms to what other countries across the globe are doing. And I mean, that was the two real things that was my priorities as president, was making sure first and foremost we can have a correct policy going forward. Secondly, that education element that allows people and the influencers, the people that are making the decisions, educate them to understand what agriculture is doing. And I think COP26 in Glasgow gives us a great opportunity to influence the decision makers to say, well, yes, just be careful that you don't tar us with the same stick with what's happening, in other parts of the world, because that's not the case in Scotland.
And I assume I don't actually know much about COP and how these showcases work, but is there an opportunity to sort of welcome to COP, and you can sort of showcase what's happening in Scotland? Is that part of it?
Yes, and part of that will be collaborative as well. We're looking to do things even with some of the European farmers as well, because although sometimes we're quite competitive in some of the things we have across Europe, from an agricultural perspective, COP26 is massive. So we're all in the same position. I mean, we're all looking at how things are looked at in agriculture. I mean, even the way the sort of calculations are done right now. We're talking about carbon footprints, but agriculture is always it's always about emissions. It's always about methane. It's always about nitrous oxide. It's always about carbon dioxide, and it's all about tailpipe emissions. It's measured. Nobody mentions or measures the fact that we're actually sequestering a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere because of the practice we're doing. So that sequestering and that landscape that's behind me, what's on farm here, is doing a massive amount when it comes to climate change and biodiversity. But then when you look at forestry, and this is where there's always a bone of contention, a really serious one, the forestry side, you're never counting the negatives. So nobody's counting the ploughing, the infrastructure, the transport, the processing, and then probably the transport in two ways. So nobody counts the downside. It's always about the net, the net sequestration in forestry, but it's always about the net emissions when it comes to agriculture. We should be counting it more, sort of taking that holistic view when it comes to the proper calculations, so that everything's counted in the mix. And we know find that grassland sequestration is actually very high now as well. Science is actually moving in our favour, I have to say, but it's trying to keep that science up to date. Even again, from the methane point of view, looking at GWP 100, which is the calculation that's getting used, global warming potential is the 100 is the calculation that's used under the IPCC, which is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They look at this for the calculation as GWP 100, which is that long-term emissions of methane. But that's 30 years old, that scientific research. GWP star, which is newer, it recognises the short-term emissions of methane because it breaks down and is sequestered back in. So there's a difference between methane and carbon dioxide, because methane's a flow pollutant. So what's emitted by cattle is sequestered back in through the ground, whereas carbon dioxide builds a stack all the time. So that's a stock pollutant rather than a flow pollutant. So it's quite, there's some real different challenges in there.
I'd never considered that. We always look at the positives of forestry and the negatives of farmland, but never look at the positives and the negatives. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So you have a lot of forestries carted and transported for sometimes hundreds of miles, and then sometimes it's even exported, and it's really frustrating when you see that export and then you bring it back in imported once it's been processed as well. So that's really frustrating. So we need to do more on the processing side on all fronts here at home.
That whole idea has never made sense to me. I mean, like, you know, I'm not going to call out companies. We know the companies that shift wood fuels. Like, they're shifting logs to go into biomass boilers as chip and stuff like that halfway across the country, but they're spending that diesel the whole way. It doesn't really seem correct.
No, absolutely. Well, when you look at the Drax power station that burns and wood chip now as opposed to coal, and they use 130% of the UK's production for timber, and 30% comes in from South Carolina. You know, and you think this is absolute madness. You know, whereas none of that's that interest, that sort of cost, and is it seems crazy, to be quite honest. It just flies in the face of reality.
It does absolutely, and it seems like a good time to sort of shift on to something quite closely related. We're on forestry at the minute, Martin. A big buzzword, if you will, at the minute is agroforestry, which is, I think there's so many merits to, but I think it's getting to that sort of stage where we're maybe going past the beneficiary side and going into maybe sides of detriment. What do you think about agroforestry? Yeah,
agroforestry, I mean, it's a different thing, because agroforestry is probably what's behind me just now. That's what you would term as agroforestry, because that's part of that's part of farming, is providing shelter, it's providing shade, it's providing biodiversity. It's mixed in with agriculture. It's not blanket forestry. So there's two different things here. And I mean, I mentioned the farmer-led groups and how they reported. Well, the Farming for 1.5 Degrees have just had their final report out now as well, and they're recommending about 6,000 hectares in agroforestry, and try and get farmers to take up these options where you can put small bits in, whether it's wildlife corridors, that helps as a carbon sink. So it's helping with climate change. It's helping in biodiversity, because that is creating that wildlife corridor, but it's also integral to the farm, because you're maybe it could be a double fenced area from a sort of biosecurity element, or it could be shade and shelter. So you've got all these things in the mix. So agroforestry and how it's integrated within the farm, absolutely ideal. But the blanket situation we're seeing just now, and again, 1.5 Degrees report had also highlighted that we shouldn't be, unless if there's going to be more than 20 hectares, we need to have a right look at, how this is going to affect, the rest of agriculture, how it's going to have an effect in the rural area as well. Because taking farms out, whole farms out, which is happening right now, and all getting planted, can't go on, because all that's doing is you're going to create that that sort of monoculture again. But more importantly, we're limiting our opportunities for young people to get a start and get on the farming ladder, and we're also limiting our ability to produce food. I think we've always got, we dropped that bit, too quickly. The food and drink element in Scotland is massive. And if we can't produce it here and we rely on other nations to produce it, it doesn't give us much of a bargaining chip when it comes to, whether it's trade deals or having an argument or a dispute with another country. If you can't feed your own country, you haven't got an awful lot to bargain with, because you're reliant so much on others. Because who knows what's going to happen in the future, and limiting our ability to produce food is a very dangerous thing to do.
And what you're saying about agroforestry, I was always completely for it. I thought it was a great thing until recently. You heard of people selling ground that you go grow grain on, or maybe not selling it, putting trees on it instead. It's just wild.
Yeah. And there's another concept to that one as well, because there's the whole carbon credit story as well, and of course carbon credits is the new sort of, people are looking at as the new sort of gold dust basically in Scotland, and it's our green credentials that we have here. My real worry about this, and again this is from probably from a tenanted point of view as well, there's a lot of estates in Scotland that are asset rich, absolutely, maybe a little bit cash strapped. Do they want to continue with a tenancy if it's not a secure tenancy, or do they want to say, no, let's finish that and plant it in trees and we can sell our carbon credits? Now that's a real worry. What we should be far smarter with this. So when it comes to the peatland code or the forestry code or the soil carbon code, all these credits are going to be on the market. I think it's really dangerous, because we're pulling the rug from under our feet and we're selling our crown jewels. Our crown jewels could be the green credentials, and we've got, as well as having net zero targets, we've also got targets to meet. Ambition 2030 is about having food and drink doubling its value by 2030 from where we are at the minute. The best way to do that is probably from an export point of view, and I know that brings its own challenges, because that's, you're thinking we want to use our own product instead of importing. But if you want to double the value, the green credentials we have on the products we're producing, whether that's grain, cereals, fruit and veg, beef, lamb, whatever, we could be selling the green credentials in these products every day of every week, because our carbon credentials should be on these products rather than selling it in the open market. As soon as we sell it in the open market, it goes into the private sector. Once it's in the private sector, it could even be overseas. So we've got overseas enterprises, multinational companies, maybe even airlines that are saying they're now green because they've bought the green credentials from agriculture and forestry. I don't think so. It doesn't make their planes fly any greener. So whereas we're selling our green credentials, and I think we need to be really careful in this one, and we should stop that selling right now until we address it properly.
I was speaking to someone just a couple of days ago for another podcast, Kevin Harrison at the NSA, and we were talking about the sort of idea of offsetting in whatever manner. I get it. Offsetting's better than not offsetting, but if just because you buy a woodland doesn't mean that woodland wasn't there. You haven't fixed anything. You might look better, but nothing's better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Questionable.
Well, the thing is, I'd rather see. Some, we've got probably an easier opportunity here to have carbon credits on the ground that's behind us than maybe some of the intensive sectors like pigs or poultry. Now, I would far rather, because of the interdependence between all sectors in agriculture, I'd rather that instead of trading the green credentials that we maybe have, I'd rather the pigs and poultry sector had that, because we oddly enough, you wouldn't think it, but I rely on the intensive sectors like pigs and poultry, because the demand, and so does the cereal sector, because the demand they have on cereals for feeding, so that we can actually produce pork in this country, produce chicken, have eggs, good high quality eggs. The demand that they create on the cereals provides us with straw. So because of that, so if they weren't having that huge demand, there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of tons that's used every year from that sector. That's creating the byproduct for straw that we need for bedding our cattle in the winter when we've got the cows that are inside in the winter. So that's straw. And then because we've got that straw, that product that goes into dung, it's made into farm manure, then it goes out, it goes back on the land. Because it goes back on the land, it's adding organic matter to the soil. It then maximizes the soil health and its ability to capture carbon and organic matter. So it's all interdependent. So I would rather see the carbon credits being evened out across all sectors in agriculture, and then as we sell any product from Scotland, then it's Scottish Agricultural PLC that has that carbon credits, and that value should be on the product we're selling.
and we look at sort of aiming for circular. I can never say that word.
Circular economy.
Yeah, thank you. I've never been able to get my mouth around that word. So glad you knew what I was saying. You don't get much more of an example of than what you've just said. You know, everything's working in together. And on carbon, I mean, we're talking about credits here and stuff like that. We're aiming for net zero. What is the date for net zero? Is that 2050?
2045.
2045. So we're aiming for net zero. What net zero means, I think, is still somewhat ambiguous. And how we measure it is also kind of up in the air as well. I mean, we have some pretty good calculators out there, but it's still in its infancy and is a bit of a struggle. But what does net zero mean? As sort of as close as you can sort of think. What do you think net zero means exactly? And do you see us reaching that target in 25 years?
I think it's about, you mentioned the calculations, Wallace. It's absolutely about the calculations. I mean, you know, when you speak to Meat and Livestock Australia, they say their red meat industry is going to be net zero by 2030, but they're using different calculations. So, so I believe that if you looked at the background behind me and calculated it all correctly, I believe areas like this is probably carbon as net zero already. But again, we can't look at things holistically. We've got to do, and I totally agree, we've got to do more. I mean, we started doing soil mapping here. We're a whole farm, we're doing soil mapping now. This is next year will be our 5th year. The following year we'll go back to the start again. And we're GPS, you know, testing the soils and variable rate application of lime. Now that's a big saving. And I think all these things, you know, more of us that do these kind of things is going to help. But I think it's about the calculations. And I think, you know, from a Scottish perspective, if we count everything, because again, the forestry you've seen behind me, although it's agroforestry, that's not accounted and attributed to agriculture, which is totally unfair. That's attributed to forestry. Agriculture, although it's a farm woodland, that's not attributed to agriculture, which is totally wrong, absolutely wrong. And that needs to change so that we get recognition for what we've done from that point of view. And again, coming back to it's far more than just the net zero element, because if we were to look at, and just to give you an example, if we were to look at solely meeting net zero and carbon footprint, as I said, we've got sort of continental cattle on the low ground. If you look at their carbon footprint in comparison to the Highlanders that are on the hill, it's far better because they grow quicker, they'll go away, they get finished earlier, so their carbon footprint's actually really good. But when you look at the Highlanders, they're terrible because they're a lot later in maturing, but they're doing far more when they're on the hill for biodiversity. So from a climate change point of view, you would get rid of the Highlanders, but from a biodiversity point of view, you get rid of the continental. So how do you square that circle? So we need to have something and a form of calculation that takes that into account. And again, it comes back to the element of food production as well. So we've got 3 things at the top of the agenda: ability to produce food, we'll have to address climate change, and we need to address biodiversity. But we can't look at them in silos. We need to look at them as a group altogether.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where the calculation is slightly flawed. I say slightly, I don't know much about it, but you've got to consider all those 3 things. We can't just say, yes, we're perfect for carbon, but we're not producing any food, or we're perfect for food production, but there's only one food being made here and it's the only thing we have on this. You know, it's
absolutely. And we've actually pulled together all these, you know, the 3 organizations that are looking at this. Nature Scott's one of them, that are looking at you know, developing an app that looks at what biodiversity is on the ground. We've also got how AgriCalc is looking at the way that calculator is working in the minute and how that's progressing. And then we've got SOS, who have a carbon positive sort of developing a carbon positive app, so that you can look at sort of the metrics behind that, so that it recognises what's on the ground at the minute. So it's about pulling all these 3 things together, and we've been trying to do that. We'll actually have a meeting on this again next week, how we can actually pull that all together instead of having a carbon situation, an environmental situation, and then you've got the food side as well. You want to be able to pull that all together in one audit. You want to be able to, so you can say, well, this farm is that's where it sits from carbon, biodiversity, environment, all these things, and then you can build up a national picture, and that would give you a national picture of where the whole country is. And I think if that's done correctly, we'll be in a great position globally.
Yeah. No, sounds promising. You mentioned VRT there, variable rate technology on the line. Do you have any idea as to what sort of percentage savings you are seeing there, or are you not sure?
It was really interesting because we did it. Yeah, I do. Because we say, in fact, it wasn't really just on the lime. What we found out when we did it the first year, and since then we've found out right across the farm, because as I said, this is the 4th year. Next year will be the last year, and we've been around it all. But we found we were through the roof in phosphates, absolutely through the roof, almost to the detriment of uptake of nutrients for plants because the phosphates were too high. And so for the last 4 years, we've been putting very limited phosphates on, and that saved us £30 a tonne. And the lime was interesting because we'd never done that before. And when you watch it's all done obviously through the computers and the tractor. And it's a little bit dearer to put it on, but you're saving it because you're not putting it where it's not required. So our target pH is 6.2. We're trying to get the whole farm and the lower ground up to 6.2. And the first time I saw the spreader going, you thought it was knackered because it was going up the field. There was a lot of lime coming out. Then all of a sudden it would just shut right down. That just meant that on that bit of the field, it wasn't needing the lime. So that was why it was so, so I think it's great technology. I think it's fantastic. And it's helping to balance up the fields, right across, whether it's, quite often your higher dry knolls, or the limes coming out of that are maybe leaching out of that a little bit more than it is in the sort of hollows. And you can see that working in practice when the lime spreader's going. But in terms of the fertilizer saving the £30 a tonne, that was a direct saving because we were doing that soil mapping, So
Do you do it for spraying as well, or just ferret and lime?
No, we don't. I use GPS for spraying, just to assist in spraying. But I don't have we don't have that sort of technology here. But I mean, the arable guys are using this on a constant basis. They've been taking the lead in this for years.
It's brilliant stuff. I mean, I focus quite a lot on the sort of arable advancements in my masters like that, and like controlled traffic farming, real-time kinetics, all that stuff's phenomenal. Like the savings it can make crazy. On sort of arable there, a couple of things that might be hitting us quite hard, or maybe for benefit, who knows. Glyphosate's in a rough area. For those of you listening might know of it as Roundup. I don't really know where it's going. Do you think it has a future in the industry? Do you think it's still here in 10 years? Or
I think it needs to be here for a whole raft of reasons, or a replacement to do it. Because again, from an environmental perspective, I mean, a lot of the arable sector now is using min-till, a low-till, strip-till, and I mean, they rely on Roundup to do, or glyphosate to do that as well. And that creates an environmental benefit because you're not doing the same level of ploughing. I'm not saying you can't, you shouldn't be ploughing, because in some areas you still need to plough, depending on the soil type, depending on where you are. But I mean, and again, if you didn't have glyphosate, we would be probably limited and be able to do that, because that, creates that that barrier for the weeds. You can control your weeds better. You wouldn't be able to grow your crops properly with min-till or zero-till if you didn't have that glyphosate there. From our own perspective, I've not ploughed here for 9 years now, and the reason being, 9 years ago we bought a direct driller, because we don't grow any cereals here, but we do grow quite a lot of turnips and rape and kale for finishing lambs. And again, this is about it turns out, and this isn't why, this is ironic, but this isn't why we bought the driller. The reason we bought the driller is we're 6 feet fed up lifting stones all the time, because every time we go in and plough a field, all we've got to do is go and lift stones, and then you disc it, and then you lift stones again, then you harrow it, you lift stones again, then you sow it, and then you pull it, lift stones again. I've done it for far too long. And we got the idea, we thought about it for a couple of years and looked at various ones, and we imported a New Zealand machine, actually, an Aitchison driller, direct driller. And you can direct drill grass or rejuvenate grass with it as well. But what we use it for mostly is direct drilling rape and turnips and kale. And we now actually have, because we got it 9 years ago, our neighbour wanted to try it as well, tried a field. It worked really well. And then it's just growing, it's bananas now, because we're doing over 500 acre a year now. We'll have two drillers, and we're going all over the place. My girls are doing quite a bit of drilling now as well, and they're doing a lot of it, in fact. And it's just caught on. And the advantage is, what we do, like the first year, and the thing is, you can do, like, for example, this year with a 15 acre field, quite a stony field, I sprayed it off in the morning, put the fertilizer on in the afternoon, drilled it by dinner time the following day. So within 24 hours, the crop was in, and there's no other chemical required, because you don't have a weed challenge, and you're using that top bit of the productive soil. You're not ploughing up cold soil that's maybe not so fertile. You're not releasing nitrous oxide either. and that's now a benefit of what we're doing. But what we're finding now is the following year, we just disc the surface of that, so we don't plough it again. We do put glyphosate on it again the following year, and then that gives us a great seed bed, because all that sheep ted and dung, or cattle, if you've been feeding cattle off it, is on the top, on the surface, and that gives a great start to the new crop of grass that's going to be there for another 10 years. And it's about soil health. So glyphosate from an environmental and soil health point of view is really required. Now, I understand where there's concerns, maybe pre-harvest, but we've got to be very careful, because if you say, well, there's a risk, and you take it off pre-harvest, well, is there a risk? That's not, you're then saying there is a risk. Why? So why are you taking it off pre-harvest? But I think from an environmental point of view, using it for what arable sectors, using it on stubbles to clean them up before it's drilled, or pre-drilling, or what we are doing in our part of the world, I think it's an absolute necessity from an environmental point of view as much as anything. Because again, I'm only using one spray. I'm not having to go on with, and since we've started direct drilling, I haven't sprayed for flea beetle. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because there's a lot of divot still there, a lot of grass still there, and whereas if it's ploughed and it's drilled and it's brown soil and you get a green plant coming up, it's a very easy target, very focused target. Whereas you're still coming up through a sort of a turf and a divot, and maybe it's not. So we haven't sprayed for flea beetle since we started direct drilling, and we've certainly never sprayed for weeds. So we're actually reducing our chemical usage by using glyphosate, and it's an environmental benefit too.
That's great. You're not having to spray for flea beetle. It's been tricky the country over. It kind of comes down to that triangle you mentioned of the sort of food production, environmental, biodiversity, doesn't it? I mean, the going into human consumption and also the elimination of some biodiversity is the two arguments mainly against glyphosate, from what I understand.
Yes.
And the argument, well, it's kind of died down the last couple of years, but it was certainly running pretty strong 2 or 3 years ago, and I personally don't see it continuing. But I think, as you say, we need something else. It can't just be this is gone. That's it. There needs to be something.
Yeah, well, look at the crops. I mean, I can honestly say the crops of kale, the turnips, and we've been growing since we started using the driller have been far, far better, way better than what we were growing before. So in terms of productivity, it's a productivity improvement. So if you're being more productive from less inputs, that's a climate change benefit. If we're looking after the soil health better because of what we're doing, that's a climate change benefit as well, because we're not ploughing up that cold soil, releasing that nitrous oxide. So there's a huge climate change benefit of using glyphosate as well from that perspective. So it's trying to, get that understanding across. And without that replacement, I would go back to ploughing. The grass wouldn't be looking as well as what it is just now. I have no doubt about that, because the time and effort it takes. Because there was that operation that would have probably taken us the best part of a week before, because in days gone by, we would have ploughed that ground, would have spent a long time lifting stones, and then you use Treflan. I know that's not there now either, but to try and control the weeds, that would be disked in, so you'd have 2 passes of discs there. Then you'd level it off again. Then you'd have a weed spray. You'd probably have a flea beetle spray. Then you'd still probably likely have a weed challenge, and the crop's not as good. So it's about product. It's the whole things. We've got to be very careful that we don't just take something off the market just for an individual reason, because that could have wider consequences.
No, makes a lot of sense. I mean, it does sort of almost make you think down the routes of sort of gene editing. Is there potential for the crops to be made not requiring glyphosate put on? I mean, with Brexit, gene editing, GMO, they're slightly different, but for the most part pretty similar, weren't allowed in EU law. Do you think that could come in a post-Brexit?
I think it's interesting. We had a discussion of this just pre-election when we had a parliamentary hustings, and it was all the sort of lead candidates and across the parties and from the rural perspective, and it became really apparent that we didn't understand that there is actually a huge difference between GMO and gene editing, because genetic modification is about taking a foreign DNA from something else and implanting it into what you're trying to change. Gene editing is just fast tracking plant breeding. So it's 2 completely different things. And I think as that becomes more apparent, people are looking at gene editing a little bit differently. Because if you look at, the sort of the vertical farming situation, you see it at James Hutton, you know, that gene editing, you can do that very, very quickly. But if you do gene editing, you're actually, you know, plant breeding at a faster rate, and it's just advanced. All you're doing is advancing the technology that could happen sort of naturally over a period of time. So it's fast tracking like a plant breeding. So it is different from genetic work, but again, it's about, so it's advanced plant breeding would be the terminology we should be using instead of even gene editing, because as soon as you mention genes, people go GMO, genetic modification, Frankenstein foods. That's what goes into their head, and that's not the case at all. That's not what gene editing is about. And I think there's more of a realization about, and UK government's looking at that slightly. Yes, Europe are against it right now, and of course the challenge we have with Scottish government is because they want to stay as aligned to the Europe as much as possible, because obviously politically, if they ever see themselves coming out as independents, they want to go back into Europe, so they want to keep that alignment. So again, there's challenges there as well. But I think all three, Europe, UK, Scottish government, are beginning to realise there is a difference between GM and gene editing. It is a different system.
There was, when I did my masters, it was in food security, and there's 23 folk in the class, 17 of which were from China, and so they had a totally different outlook on food production. It was really interesting actually to see the sort of, you know, different cultural impacts and stuff like that. And one of them explained it in a really good way. I mean, they'd learned English 2 months before doing a master's degree in English. It was phenomenal. But the way one of my friends described it was, gene editing is in a shop. When there's tomatoes have been bought, you replace it with tomatoes, and genetic modification is putting an orange in.
That's like, right. That's
such a good example. I mean, there's obviously certain things. Yeah. It's not perfect, but it's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, gene editing's the potentials there are endless. I mean, we're looking at, it's not something we require hugely in Scotland, but your drought-resistant barleys, you know, stuff like that. The potentials are huge, and I hope it is a stigma we can sort of get out the way of, you know, it being Frankenstein foods, as you say, and putting, what's the one, injecting a fish into a tomato, you know, all these sort of things, which, But I mean, it's been great actually to talk, Martin. I mean, I feel like I've just sat here for an hour and just picked your mind about what's happening in the world of farming, but do you think there's anything that maybe we haven't covered about yourself that we should have, or anything that you'd like to say that we haven't been on to?
Well, I don't think so. Not that I can think of. No, I'm just. I mean, I'm just always positive and upbeat, because I think, you know, I think you've got to be positive. And sometimes I get criticised for being too positive, but unless you're positive, you're not going to sell the industry. I think we've got something to be extremely proud of in Scotland, and unless we sell that story, you know, it's going to be a challenge. And I think going back to sort of recognition and kind of relates to Brexit as well, you know, we thought, you know, sheep was going to be an absolute disaster, and it might have been, because what actually saved the sheep sector was COVID, ironically. I mean, COVID's been absolutely horrendous, we know that, but you know, you go back to a year past March when you know, we were traditionally bringing in, as I said, we import about 360,000 tonnes. Some of that product was coming in through Ireland, was coming from Poland, and some of the beef that was coming in. And because the food service sector shut down, that product ended up in supermarket shelves, and consumers didn't want it. They just said, no, I'm not eating Polish beef. I'm going to eat a homegrown product. And of course, that focused the buyers on the home market. That's what saw an immediate price rise in the beef sector, which was much needed because it was in a really poor position. So it's focused people's minds more now on where our food comes from than what it's ever done. So although COVID was a real disaster, from an agricultural perspective, actually focused our consumers' mind, and that was something we have to be grateful for, but we need to hold on to it. So, so again, I think, you know, that's something, if we can make sure our consumer is, you know, recognised for the support, and we deliver what that consumer is wanting, then I think we're going to be in a much better position, because, you know, the sheep sector is flying right now. We've got, which is great to see, and that's driven by home demand, not export, because obviously with Brexit, our exports were seriously limited. We did get some, obviously, but nothing like what we're doing before. But then we had families going to the butcher shop, having a nice bit of lamb, you know, maybe getting a bottle of wine at the supermarket, cooking it at home, so cooking a home-produced product at home, and they were doing it maybe for, I don't know, a third or 25% of the cost it would be if they went out. So which they're doing more often. And we speak to the butchers every week, and they're maintaining that consistent 30 to 40% increase in sales that they had pre-COVID. That's fantastic. So, it's really good to see.
I was just doing some, I wouldn't say research, I was just looking up some prices yesterday. And I remember this time last year, we were happy at how prices had shot up. So we're already in an upward way. And I think it was the overall AHDB, the overall sheep price dead weight, so that includes cow, lambs, everything, was up 65 pence on the year.
Yes.
On a year that we were already happy, and that's got to be good.
Yes, it has to be good. Has to be good.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the good thing about it is our consumers happy as well, which is fantastic, or they wouldn't be buying the product. And
it's good. It does feel at the minute as if the consumer is on our side, which sometimes absolutely. It didn't. And I mean, I think there's been a lot of reasons for that. I think COVID sort of brought us all closer in general, and some of those people are farmers, and we're getting in talking. We're maybe not the best at sort of defending our product from time to time, but I feel like we're not having to anymore, and it's sort of like it's just happening. I think Clarkson's Farm was a good one. I think it did a lot of good for
and I think we're going to focus that. We'll try to put some, sort of highlight sort of do some of the myth busting going into the back end as well, to sort of make sure people know what the real facts are behind agriculture, and from an economic perspective, from a climate change and biodiversity perspective, and let our consumer know that we are taking this really seriously and doing our best to try and produce food in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, that's a good topic to end on. But just before we do end, there's two things I ask everyone, and that's, first off, where do you see yourself in 5 years, given what you've said so far? I assume not president, but and then the second thing is, if you had any tips for folk going into farming, what would they be?
Firstly, when I see myself in 5 years, I would see myself here definitely at home. Definitely, because the one bit I miss is any opportunity I try and get, I'm trying to give the girls a help, because I miss the I'm a farmer through and through, and that'll never change. They'll never take that out of me, and I'm just desperate to do more. And there's always things that I'm seeing needing done that. Yes, it's maybe not getting done because I know the girls are focusing on so much livestock and a lot of other work as well, but I just think I could go and sort that drain, I could clean that ditch out, I could do all these things. That's not happening. So I see myself being back here and doing a lot of the bits I want to keep developing and try to be a bit more progressive in the farm. That's where I see myself. And any tips for people trying to come in, keep being positive about it, keep asking the questions, keep pushing, and keep trying hard to get on the ladder, because there's not a better industry to be involved in. Yes, sometimes it's challenging. That goes without saying, but I wouldn't do anything else. I think providing food in the manner we're doing it in Scotland, I think that recognition is going to increase in years to come, and I think that'll create its own opportunities. But just keep at it, keep trying to get on the ladder if you can, keep trying to get onto whether it's an apprenticeship. Not everybody needs to be in their own business. A lot of people will say, well, no chance. I don't want to have my own business. I want to work in agriculture. So it's not just about owning or renting a farm. It's about just getting a chance to work in it, because, it's a great industry to be involved in.
And I think you mentioned it's challenging. I think there's very few things in this world that are rewarding and not challenging. You've got to fight over something for it to be rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, good words. Well, I think that's us, Martin. I really appreciate your time.
No
for those of you listening, Martin and I have tried to arrange this about 4 times, and we came across hurdles each time, but we've got it here at the end. This for yourself, Martin, will be going live come. It'll be September time, I think, maybe the end of this month, but it's about a month's time. But thank you for coming on. Appreciate it, and I hope everyone's enjoyed listening.
No bother. Okay, thank you, Wallace.
Speak to you later on.